if a person really doesn't believe in life after death, then why are they living their life the way that they're living at the moment? What is the foundation of having any kind of concept about virtue or goodness or kindness or care, compassion for other people? This is a new little initiative here at Manifesto that we're trying out. I just suggested the name. We could call it Paul's Padkos, which, of course, in Afrikaans, Padkos is the word for food for the journey, right? Or just like, it really means road food.
Yeah.
As a, not roadkill, right? But food for the journey.
Yeah, you got to make that distinction.
Yeah, let's hope that it's not roadkill at least. But yeah, what we were talking about, Alex, is you know, we often have a lot of conversations, you and me, which are really valuable for us. And so we're thinking about, like, you know, creating a video with some of the thoughts that we're working on at the moment and seeing if it can inspire some other people as well. So yeah. So yeah, I mean, I've just been reading this book and I sent you some passages from it, and we thought, okay, well, how about we try and do something here? The book is called Life After Death. It is written by an Orthodox Metropolitan called Nafpaktos Hierotheos. A Greek guy. I actually don't know much about him, to tell you the truth, but I bought the book when I was visiting a monastery over in England, called it's the monastery of St. John the Baptist in Essex, over in the UK, and it's actually taken me like 3 years to read it, and it's actually blown me away. This book, it's been really fascinating and interesting. And so I suggested we try read up a passage right from the end of the book, and see if we can talk a little bit about why that was interesting for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Should I just dive into that?
Yeah, do that.
Yeah. So it's the epilogue, and it says, "Death is the greatest mystery, which has always occupied man's spirit. It's a consequence of sin, but also a cause of it. Mortality, which we carry in us from birth, determines the course of our life. If we watch our reactions, we'll discover that they all start from the problem of death. Insecurities, fear, and self-love, which give rise to ambition, love of possession, self-indulgence, and many other passions, have the origin in the experience of death." So yeah, I think this is something we can all recognize, right? Like, no matter what you're coming from, you know, like the at least like this characterization of death as a mystery, which we don't understand. We often do everything we can to avoid thinking about it. But if you just look around you in the world today, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out that a lot of the challenges that we face and the difficulties that people have in their life, it's from an unresolved fear and unknown, like the unknown quantity of one's own death, and not being ready for that as well. I think a lot of people will very freely admit that, like, you know, I don't think I'm ready for my death, at least. I don't know about yeah.
I think people do sort of try and evade it. I think there is that fear of death. Although if you look at the studies they've done, people will say, no, I fear failure, or I fear public speaking, or I fear spiders, or some strange thing like sharks in the sea, or something crazy like that, so I don't swim. But when you put the two fears together, if you say, well, your fear of public speaking and your fear of death, when the two are confronted together, it's always fear of death that comes up. And I think what we do is we spend our whole life trying not to face that thing, that dark question that we'd rather ignore. And I've come across lots of people who don't want to go to funerals or memorials, or they don't know how to speak to people who've lost loved ones, all because they've got to now confront their own mortality.
Yeah. And I think that there are examples of people, you can sense it in someone who has thought about and reflected deeply about the question of death, and who's living their life in a way that's aligned with that. And I think you'll notice then that they're not afraid of anything else either. That this dealing with that root fear of your own death will actually help you to be able to be able to face any situation. You know, if you're not afraid of death, then what can scare you, right?
Absolutely. And I think sort of to transcend that fear of death, you need to understand it. And so I think that speaks into this idea of death as a mystery, and it's not knowing what death is and what it brings and what happens that perhaps is the fear. It's the fear of the unknown, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, I mean, this is a Christian book. And so the title of the book is Life After Death. And so there's an assumption there and a shared understanding that there is something after death, which is increasingly not the widespread understanding in our society today. No. But I mean, in our conversation we had before, you underlined, which I thought was really relevant, how, you know, if a person really doesn't believe in life after death, then why are they living their life the way that they're living at the moment? What is the foundation of having any kind of concept about virtue or goodness or kindness or care, compassion for other people? Because if there's nothing happening, then, you know, the only thing that I can think of that like would make sense is that that person is just a wimp, a chicken. Like, they don't dare to actually step up and live fully. I mean, this was Nietzsche's kind of complaints as well, right? And his attack on Christianity, and also what drove him crazy, I think, at the end of the day. Because if there is no God, if there is no life after death, then you might as well just, you know, fully indulge yourself in everything. Absolutely. If there's no purpose behind existence.
Well, I sort of see two things there, in the sense that if you really believe that we live this little short life, and really it's really short, and we die, and that's it, we end. Well, why spend your whole life slogging at a job you hate? I mean, most people hate their jobs. Very few have the bravery or the vision to sort of say, I'm going to throw it all in and try something I love. But if you've got no reason to sort of think, well, you know, there's meaning in this, there's purpose, I've got to live a life that carries me into life after death, well, then, you know, take those risks, live your life, be hedonistic if that's sort of your go-to sort of position. Or if you're sort of more responsible and you think, you know, your life needs to mean something, you need to build a legacy, you need to make an impact, you need to sort of invent a cure for some dread disease, or make some invention that makes, you know, energy production through coal, fossil fuel, and, you know, and a sort of internal energy source, something like that that's crazy enough. I see my thing's gone there. You know, do that. That's what I would say is, if you really believe that, you'd be doing that. And you know, if you don't believe that, well, then ask yourself, why are you living the life you're living now?
Yeah. So let's continue with the text. Death, it says, separates loved ones, breaks up community and unity of families, and spreads despair and hopelessness. Love is closely connected with death. Someone loves in order to overcome the anguish and pain of the death which he experiences in his existence. But even when he loves, he senses that death is coming nearer and will someday be the cause that brings his love to an end. Whoever sees love outside of the experience of death is mistaken and sentimental, for love is linked with pain, pain about finding love and pain about the fear of losing it. This was really just a beautiful way for me of explaining the human condition. It's this continual yearning after something that's slipping between our fingers somehow. It's like, you know, grabbing a moonbeam, or trying to hold water in the cup of your hand, right? And you know, we're constantly yearning for connection with other human beings, and this experience, and it's always just somehow out of reach in our human experience, right? But I think this for me is the answer at a very fundamental, very human level, without talking about metaphysics, about like how this understanding starts of confronting death, of confronting the situation of death, is first of all recognizing the truth of the situation, that, you know, death is the most certain thing in existence.
What did I say? Death
coming, and it breaks. Nothing lasts in our material world. no matter what you're building, no matter what you're creating, no matter what you're, moving towards, then it's all going to fall to pieces because of death. And the moment you're born, that's when that process is starting.
Well, what I really thought interesting about bringing love into the picture was that it really highlights the fact that for most people, if they really think about it, death is about loss. And I heard such a great quote recently about grief. And the quote says, "Grief is just love that doesn't have a place to go." And I thought that's really profound, because, when you grieve, it's because you love that person and you have no way to express that love anymore. There's no object for your love. And it sort of summed up for me what death means for many people is this loss. It's final, it's gone, it's over. So not just the loss of a loved one, but the loss of your life, the loss of your hopes and your dreams of what you wanted to achieve. So, in our sort of normal society, when someone dies young, we bewail the fact that they've died young because were full of potential and all that is lost. Whereas if they're sort of knocking on their 90s and they go, we say, oh, well, it's all right. They had a good life. And then, if they were successful, good. If they weren't, well, that's their own problem.
Yeah. Okay. So the book continues. Thus, the man who contemplates death is formulating a truth. No fact is so certain as death. A great philosopher of the meaning of being, Heidegger, would say that to exist is to exist towards death. Pretty much what we just said. In fact, to exist authentically means an avowal of existing towards death. It's a constant reminder, and how little we think about death, right? And how much it it helps us to make clear decisions. If I look back in my teens, my 20s, and even a lot of my 30s, like I lived as if I was immortal. A lot of the decisions that I made, I had very little understanding of, like, I'm on this journey one time, and the decisions I make have consequences as well. And it's something that we spend way too little time thinking about, I think. Yeah, and even as when adults veer away from it and don't deal with it as well, then it's so clear that, like, well, children just get they have no real relationship to it as well.
So, we shelter them from that. We don't want them to know anything about death.
Yeah. Even increasingly, there's old folk tales and stories and even Bible stories as well, where people get their heads cut off and things like that. And now we're saying oh no, children can't handle that kind of stuff. It's like rubbish. Children love that kind of thing. Like, they don't get nightmares from that kind of stuff. Like, they want stories where the bad guy dies and that's and sometimes the good guy dies as well in stories as well, right? Like, kids aren't afraid of that kind of thing. Like, they need to.
It's just in our modern society, a sanitized society, that we have that. This is a society where you can eat meat and not connected to a cow that lived and breathed, and your meat comes from the supermarket and you slap it on the barbecue or in the pan, and that's fine. But in times past, kids grew up with the fact that if someone died, it would usually have been in their home. They lived with the fact that there was this high mortality rate. So many people they knew at some point would die. So even young children were confronted with death frequently and had to have an understanding. But I think we've lost that ability, and we've sheltered not just our children, but ourselves from the harsh realities as we sort of see it, rather than confronting these things, understanding them, and then finding a good way to sort of integrate that into our life.
Yeah, I actually haven't experienced yet. I've heard a lot about the Orthodox funeral service, but it's really a celebration. The Psalms are read through and through, and it's one of the most. I actually just today we're celebrating Saint Macarius. He was a Russian saint in the 15th century, and he was the Metropolitan leader of the Russian Church. And he gave the Russian Tsar asked him, hey, give me a good spiritual book that I can read, so I can become a more enlightened person. He asked the leader of the church. And so Macarius, he gave the Tsar the funeral service.
Mm.
And the Tsar was very offended by this, actually. But Saint Macarius, he said, no, read it. This is the right book for you. You need to understand this passing of death.
Mm.
And so the last little paragraph that we're going to read, it's a long book, a couple of 100 pages or 300 pages or so, but we're going to read one last passage, one last line, which is Christianity, which is true philosophy, is a study of death. The saints faced correctly this great problem which torments man. The desert ascetics were the true students of death. However, their study was made with the experience of the grace of God, and it spread not hopelessness and despair, but freedom, peace, love, hope, departure from the restrictive limits of the senses and the concrete. That is why they were true men and preeminently social. So, it's like, I get it. Like, some person who's not a Christian is going to hear that and be like, oh, what the hell is this? These Christians, who think they have like the truth and they're so arrogant and stuff like that. It's like, well, it's like, I understand why you have that. And maybe you grew up with a specific understanding of Christianity, which didn't show these fruits at all. But I think anybody who just takes a step back for a moment and looks at our society today, then you can see how, and especially if you just even spend a bit of time looking into the desert fathers, these men who went out into the desert in the 3rd and 4th centuries, or the 4th and 5th centuries, and really studied death, lived a life of death. Like, they embraced death in their own lives as a way of kind of following the path that Christ had set, right? And obviously the first 300 years of Christianity, then, people were just slaughtered for being Christians a lot of the time. And then these were the guys who, and this is where the builders of the modern church was the desert fathers. They went out into the desert and they really tried to gain a deeper understanding. They rejected the opportunities to become like, join the court of Constantinople or whatever it is. And we see the fruits of these people like Saint Anthony the Great and Saint John Chrysostomos. These were people who lived really lives of self-sacrifice to be able to gain an understanding of how this issue of death is tormenting us and how we can live a life of hope and peace directly through that. So yeah, that's something that I think that even if you say like, oh, I don't believe in God, like, understanding the very foundation of the society that you're living in today requires at least struggling with those ideas that those guys have put forward as well. That's at least what I found for myself.
Well, I think it's a really interesting thought, is that, you need to remember death in the sense that you have so much life to live. And there is a weighing up of what you've done with that life. Even if, as you say, you don't believe in life after death, you don't believe in God. And we see it every day with men particularly who hit that midlife crisis. And what that really is them weighing up their life. They're saying, look, I've got this far in my life and I've got so much to show for it. And usually they sort of hit that crisis because they think, what have I done with my life? And I've got so little time. So in that sense, to remember your mortality, that there's a time limit on how long you're here, not only to judge yourself, but if you are as a Christian, you know that there is an accounting. And I think that's really important, that sort of, in terms of the impact it has on our lives, is we start to say, well, I'm going to keep short accounts. I'm going to keep short accounts with people, and I'm going to keep short accounts with God. And I also like the emphasis on hope. Instead of despair and hopelessness, the Christian message is about this hope of the resurrection. Paul says without it, the Apostle Paul, he says, without it, we are of all men most miserable. Therefore, eat, drink, and tomorrow you die. And so, we have this hope. And I like the point you made about the Christians who died for these beliefs. And you see it in the early Christians who were martyred, that, they weren't afraid of sometimes some terrible deaths. They faced them with fortitude, with bravery. And in fact, the way they faced death persuaded many who didn't believe in God that here is something of great value. And I like the aspect of that. There's where true manhood lays, is this idea that you can face what is perhaps the greatest fear with immense fortitude, even hope. To be hopeful in death is an amazing change of perspective. And I think that's really where the Christian message drives us to, is that it's not all lost. There is hope, and this hope transcends death.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I consider myself a very scientific person, and I would say today, as a Christian, I'm far more loyal to science than I was 5 years ago as an atheist, because I think that what an atheist is often doing is he is extremely arrogant in an unscientific way about how much science can say about reality. Because even science itself will say, if you just take like physical reality, like, you know, the stuff that the universe is made of, like matter consists of something like 7% of the universe, right?
Yeah.
So the vast majority of the universe, we call it dark energy and dark matter, and we don't know what on earth it is. We don't know what it's doing. We don't know the causes of it, the nature of it, you know, what's happening with it. We can't actually detect it with any instruments, except that we need it to make every sense of like how the universe works. And so a little bit of humility about realizing, you know, like the science of 100 years ago, we look at that today and we kind of laugh at it. Yeah. But the science of 100 years from now, we're going to look at what we believe today in science and think like, oh, that was a little bit unenlightened, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's I would say there's an infinite space of learning and growth in our understanding of the way reality works, and science is making inroads into that. Yes, but it's still a long way to go as well. Yeah. And so, just I think when one opens up to this idea that, okay, well, maybe there's more to existence than just physical reality, and I need to start taking seriously some of the deepest thinkers of the human race and existence that have been thinking about these things in a far deeper way than I have been, without being distracted by social media and likes on Instagram and whatever other things that I have, you know, but really dedicated their lives to it. Maybe these people actually understood some things that I wasn't able to do as well. And that for me, I think is a real opening and you, again, you need to take the Christian message and understanding deeper, which has some big challenging things. You know, this thing of like the resurrection, like, well, that absolutely resurrection, like, you know, it's like, but yeah, it's like your metaphysics of reality are going to fall apart unless you draw on some deeper well of wisdom of that humankind have been building.
Absolutely. Well, there's sort of like an arrogance to science, which shouldn't be there if you're truly sort of following that sort of way of thinking and looking at the world.
I don't think it's science. I think it's bad scientists.
Well, I agree with you there. It's the arrogance of the person. But the point I'm wanting to make is that, you know, if you are really serious about looking at the world in a scientific way, I think you're going to come to the realization that you don't know everything. There's more out there that you don't know than what you actually know. And you know for sure that there are many things you can't see and that we never knew about. Just as it came sort of, we progressed, we discovered more. You know, gravity. We could see its effects, but we didn't understand it. And I think in the same way, the metaphysical, the spiritual, impacts our natural world, and we see the effects, but we don't understand it. And I think humility is required to say, well, I don't understand it, but that doesn't mean it's not real. And I think we can't base our understanding on an ideology. We need to base our understanding on what we can discern and what's revealed.
Yeah, exactly. Good. Alex, I think, I mean, just to finish off that one, like, I as far as I know, we still don't understand what the hell gravity is about. Like, you know, we can see, like, you know, big things attract small things, everything attracts everything else, but like, why? What actually is the root cause of that? Like, you know, there's all of these different forces, but like, what's really happening here? Well, that's a mystery, actually.
Absolutely, it is a mystery.
And so that's what I hope we can be doing more of. This was the first episode of Padkos. Let's see if we do some more. And if people enjoy listening to it, then obviously hit the subscribe button. And there'll be coming more of these conversations. Let us know if there's any questions or thoughts or reflections that anybody has from this conversation.